It's definitely interesting is how I would describe it. The color, the lighting of the shots is very, very played up, and when they're on the farm and it's like bright yellow, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Why are we making that warm?
Well, what's funny is they're in Brittany, which is notorious for being overcast and gray all the time. I mean, think of like the coast of Maine or something, with the stormy Atlantic Ocean and, gray and windy, and that's what Brittany is, and they keep making it look golden. And but, the guy clearly loves cinematography, and he's just into the, the visuals.
Just to make a distinction between the home front and the war front, right?
Probably. I mean, he is probably trying to dramatically, because the war front, there's no sunshine ever, and it's all dark, and it's all, gray and dreary, and the home front is all bright and yellow, and, so yeah, he's probably trying to visually symbolize that.
I thought it was very interesting that she keeps playing up her polio to get stuff.
Oh yeah, she totally manipulates everybody around her.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm so helpless and I'm dying, and then she just stands and steals the documents.
Yeah.
Or when she's like goes down the elevator and the people go to help her down the stairs and she just stands up and closes the wheelchair.
Did you all understand her comment there? She said it doesn't just happen at Lourdes. Lourdes is a Catholic's pilgrimage site, and people go to Lourdes to be cured miraculously of diseases and things.
Oh.
And so she's like, I've been cured of polio, and she stands up and takes the wheelchair and goes. Do you have any questions about plot points? I mean, I can probably fill it in.
It's not a question. It's really bad for the one guy who tried to smack a rat and then shot himself in the hand.
Yes, and he winds up in the hole.
I was like, oh no.
Yeah. Although, is it all that worse than anybody who accidentally stuck their head up above and gets shot, or gets caught in a battle and
I mean, he didn't die, but like he made it of the guys, he was the one who made like a mistake and actually had an accident, and then they were like, you tried to like, mutilate yourself. He was like, no, I tried to mutilate a rat, but here we are.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody know what the Tina is doing?
Who's Tina? She's trying to find a husband, right?
She's the prostitute, and she was one of the 5 men. Angel, she's the Sicilian.
She kills the general, right?
Yeah, and did everyone? That was the guy who was in the bathtub.
Oh.
And what they brought him was a list of names of people that he was supposed to stop the execution because they'd been pardoned by Poincaré, the president. And he's like, oh, I don't feel like doing that. And he dropped the note in the water. I can't read it. Oh, well. And so, yeah. So, that's why she's killing him, because she found that out somehow. So she went to kill him, and she's a prostitute, so she, obviously fooled him. Yeah.
What is the name of the protagonist?
What is it? Mathilde?
Yeah.
Mathilde.
Okay. Right. So I thought you were talking about her. So.
No.
Yeah,
Tina is the one who's she's a prostitute.
Yeah. There's so many names in this. I'm like, if I see like the actor of like the face, it's like oh, it's that one. But then it's like if I hear the name, I'm like.
Wait, which one? Yeah.
I've given up on names. I'm mostly playing off of faces.
Yeah.
Like,
you will understand it. They do a pretty good job of bringing it back together, and you do get it, and you don't need to keep all the names straight. But yeah.
It's so silly that she's like a master of disguise.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's really good at that. She gets even more clever later in the movie. She's
She's like a spy film trope, but this is not a spy film.
Well, this raises a big question, which I think is kind of interesting, is that I really feel like this film could only be made after the entire World War I generation is gone.
Oh, for sure.
It's so irreverent, but also, it's just like this film is written and filmed by somebody who had no connection to World War I, and is just sort of fascinated with it from a distance, not connected to it, because, they do a great job of depicting the battlefield and the sort of violence and the suffering, but it's also, it's not their experience. It's totally separate.
I see that connection you made with the Wes Anderson, like the directing styles, because it's a little goofy at times, and that's very much Wes Anderson trope.
Yeah. Also, I mean, the sort of quick hitting, you know, people say stuff, boom, boom, next scene, and then people, it's superficial and dumb. You know, dog farts make me smile, but then somebody pops out with some existential statement about the human condition, and then everyone just keeps going, boom, boom, boom. You know, it just keeps going, and that it does feel like Wes Anderson to me. Although I like this better than I've liked any of the Wes Anderson films I've seen.
So in the first scene with Tina, when she spat on the knife that Angela used to cut somebody in the ass,
Yeah.
what was that about? Like, I knew there was a long story behind that.
So
But,
Angel.
What did that guy do?
Yeah, Angel, the guy who's holding the knife, is one of the guys who gets. I think he was actually one of the two guys who shot each other with the music box thing, and he was her pimp. She was a prostitute, and he was her pimp. And the guy whose butt he cut was either hadn't paid her or had beaten her when he hired her, and so the pimp is enforcing, protecting them, and she's spitting on the knife as sort of a sign of contempt, you know. And maybe,
I thought that was just like I knew he'd done something to her or to like the brothel.
Yeah.
But like
No,
I didn't know what specific.
Yeah, they don't tell you. That's totally my inference is that he had either beaten her, you know, when he'd hired her as a prostitute, or he had not paid. So.
That was super interesting that she we don't have the answer yet to whether or not the fiance is alive, but how she keeps being like, if this thing doesn't happen in the next 5 seconds, then he's still alive, and it's very interesting that it keeps playing out like that.
Yeah, but it's always ambiguous.
Yeah.
You know, like if the conductor comes in to get my ticket, he's still alive, and then the door knocks, and oh my gosh, he's still alive. April Fool. You know.
Yeah, that's like how like when I started experiencing symptoms of OCD, that's how it presented.
Oh really?
Like almost exactly like that. It was like if I pick this flower and I take off all the leaves and there's an odd number, then I'm pregnant. Or like something like that.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. It's also interesting. I mean, World War I soldiers were fantastically superstitious. I mean, they really felt like if I wear this, you know, or I do this, or you know, I won't get killed. Because you know, when you're in a situation where death is that random, you start to try to figure out ways to control the situation, even if superstition. And in fact, this is totally unrelated, but I saw a study a long time ago about these psychologists wanted to see if they could teach pigeons to be superstitious. And so they had a thing where if the pigeon hit this button, it would feed them, but it would do it kind of randomly just wouldn't. And then they realized that if the pigeon had just turned around and hit the button and it fed them, but then the next time it hit it, then it would turn around and try again. And it's like the pigeons started to like come up with little routines because they thought, oh, that's what's controlling the randomness of when the food comes down, whether I turn around first or whether I, you know.
That's cruel.
Yeah. Well, the pigeons didn't complain.
I think it was World War I where they used pigeon-guided bombs, right? Or America was testing out pigeon-guided bombs.
Yeah, they tried that. It didn't work. They did use, I mean, passenger pigeons, or homing pigeons were used a lot in World War I because they were faster than runners. And we saw in Gallipoli that you got to be fast enough as a runner. So they used homing pigeons. And it actually pretty much wiped out homing pigeons in Europe.
I feel bad for pigeons, historically. I don't even think of it, then we get almost sad.
Well, darwinistically, they're in kind of a bad place too. Any species that survives by reproducing faster than it gets eaten is.
Did you
But
know
also,
that?
like, humans bred them, sorry, like pets and them, now they're just in cities being like, yeah, that's how we are. People are like, well, they're a nuisance, we have to kill them. And you're like, no. Poor things.
I was actually shocked recently when I realized that, you know, pigeons are about the only birds you will see around here that vary from individual to individual. You can like tell that pigeon is different than that pigeon. Mm-hmm. And I mean, but you know, cardinals or robins or whatever, it's like they all look crows, they all look the same. And I realized that's because some of those pigeons were escaped human domesticated bred pigeons that have different, that we actually created the variation in pigeons by breeding different breeds of pigeons, and then if they escape, they breed in the wild, and then you start getting all this weird variations in the wild.
They're so pretty.
Yeah, the question.
Kind of. Such a moment. It was a comment about the movie, and I'm trying to. Oh, I remember what it was. It wasn't a comment about the movie. During the Civil War, didn't they try to do like a donkey-guided explosive, and then that just really didn't work because the donkeys wouldn't go to the enemy lines and just sat there?
I don't know. I have not heard that one, so it's quite possible they tried it. But I have not heard about that. I do know that one of the biggest mistakes in the Civil War was the so-called Battle of the Crater. Have you guys heard of this? At the siege of Petersburg, outside of Richmond, Virginia, the Union Army, they had trenches. I mean, they had actually dug in trenches, etc. So it looked like World War I. And the Union Army dug this tunnel way, like half a mile under the Confederate trenches, and then put several thousand pounds of explosives under there and set it off. And there was this massive explosion that created a huge crater, like 50 feet deep and 100 feet across. And then the Union soldiers charged into it to get through the Confederate lines, except they couldn't get out because the sides were soft dirt. And so the Confederate soldiers just circled up, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel, and the Union soldiers were just all killed. It was just one of the most horrific fuck-ups in the Civil War, and there were a lot in the Civil War. But kind of.
Sorry, kind of talking to the explosive donkey made me think of Acoustic Kitty. CIA tried to make a spy cat during the Cold War, and because it's a cat, it didn't work.
Yeah.
I was conflicting, like on what happened to it. That the cat, either they let it go and immediately got hit by a cat, like a car, or it was fine but just didn't work because it was a cat and it didn't want to, it's a cat.
There was a study that came out last year that showed that cats actually recognize their own names, but they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
The parts of they do brain scans on cats, and when the cat hears its name, the parts of the brain that are name recognition light up. The same parts of the brain in dogs that make the dogs go running up to you, and cats are like, oh, that's my name. Yeah, whatever.
Don't wear it out.
Okay, I think we wandered away from. So let me finish World War I just for fun. Yeah, let's.
So why didn't the whole thing of digging under enemy trenches and blowing it up, why wasn't that used in World War I or World War II? It was specifically World War I, was it that they were too far apart?
Yeah, I mean, it would take a long time. My understanding is also that it's loud enough so that you can hear it, and then I also think that given the high explosive artillery and how frequently it fell in no man's land, digging under no man's land was an invitation for having your tunnel collapse on top of you if higher explosive artillery hits on top of it. But I don't know. I think they did try it in World War I, and it didn't work, and I'm not sure why not. But kind
It was
of.
pretty muddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to go pretty deep.
Yeah.
It could also be the geology of northern France that it might not have been conducive to. I mean, it might have been bedrock pretty high up.
Not that Peaky Blinders is a very historically accurate show or anything, but the main character is one of those sappers that would dig between trenches, and he has a lot of flashbacks to the horrors of fighting in such a confined dark space.
Yeah.
This is kind of my own question. Did they ever, so in the Total Blood, did they ever just, because when Paul was in the crater with the French soldier, I was just strategically this could be, an option to basically steal his uniform and then basically be a spy. Did people do that very much? Just take the uniform off of a dead soldier, because they would have had access to dead enemy soldiers quite a lot. So it seems like they could steal uniforms.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that happening. It probably did, because there would have been enough people who were utterly fluent in both French and German, for instance, or English and German, or to make that switch. You would need a soldier who died of a head wound, because you can't put on a uniform that's got one arm missing and try to pass it off as got caught in the shredder. I'm sure they tried it. I mean, they tried everything because it wasn't working what they had. So, did you have a comment or? So, the overall course of World War I was World War 1914 was a period of movement, and Drew La Rochelle talks about that. The Battle of Charleroi was right in 1914, right at the beginning of the war. It was a period of movement. So you had lots of armies moving around, and you had the front was moving, and there were lots of battles like Charleroi and the Marne, etc. And there was a lot of motion going on. But by December of 1914, they had dug the trenches. They had dug in, and there wasn't much movement after that. So 1914 was a war of movement. 1915-16 was basically a war of attrition. That on the Western Front, and we're really only talking about the Western Front here, although I will talk a little about Russia, but on the Western Front, the French and the British in 1915 and 1916 essentially thought they had to achieve a breakthrough of the German lines, and so they tried everything they could think of to break through the German lines. And the only thing they could really think of, given the weaponry they had, was the sort of standard mass attack, which is that you shell the enemy trenches for 12 to 24 hours with everything you've got, knowing that they're going to be in bunkers, and then as soon as you stop shelling, they come out and man their machine guns, etc. And then you launch a mass wave assault. You simply send so many guys over the top, out of the trenches, running across no man's land with bayonets and rifles that they can't shoot them all. Although, unfortunately, they can. And so, as we saw in All Quiet on the Western Front, as soon as the wave attack comes out, if the French are attacking the Germans, the French will bombard the Germans for 12 hours or whatever, and then as soon as the French start sending soldiers over, they have to stop the bombardment because they don't want to bombard their own soldiers. And as soon as the Germans hear the end of the bombardment, they come out of their trenches, and they mow down the French. And as soon as the French start crossing no man's land, the German artillery opens up on no man's land because they know the French are running through it. And that was all those, those times we saw the explosion, boom, 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 boom. Those were the battles, and those were absolute slaughter. I'll give you two examples. The Battle of the Somme, the British basically attacked the Germans on the northern end of the line, and on the first day they had 20,000 casualties. Overall, the Battle of the Somme produced something like 1.1 million casualties, dead and wounded, right, over 5 months. And the Battle of the Somme pushed the German lines back 8 miles, and then the Germans counterattacked and pushed it back to the same trenches they started in. So it was 1.1 million casualties with absolutely no motion whatsoever. But the worst was the Battle of Verdun. The Battle of Verdun was basically over most of 1915, from like February to October. And what the Germans realized that Verdun is a town, and it's in a river valley, and the river is a feeder to the Seine, which goes to Paris. And given the geography, if you take Verdun, there's really nothing to stop you from getting to Paris, right? There's no physical things to get in your way. So the French realized they had to defend Verdun, and Verdun had always had a big fortress. It was a medieval castle, but now it was a modern fortified fortress called Douaumont. And the Germans realized that the French had to defend Verdun. That if the Germans attacked Verdun, the French would have to throw everything they had defending it, because if they didn't, Paris was going to fall. And so the Germans, the German general Falkenhayn, came up with an idea, which is this, There's 50 some million French people, there's 80 some million Germans. We have more people than they do. So if I can get them to engage in a battle where we trade dead soldiers one for one, I win because we have more soldiers. And so his strategy was he picked Verdun. He said, I'm going to attack Verdun, not because I think I can take it, but because they have to defend it and they have to throw everything they have into it. And in his phrase, I can bleed them white. I can cause them to lose so many soldiers at Verdun that they will collapse. And they will collapse before I collapse because I have more soldiers. And so he was willing to just trade dead Germans for dead French people all day long. So the Germans attacked Verdun. And as I mentioned, in the 12-hour bombardment, they launched over 1 million shells onto about a 2-mile front. And that battle was absolute war of attrition. The Germans just kept attacking at Verdun, and the French had to keep throwing everything they had to in defending Verdun. The Germans did take Douaumont, the French took it back. The battle lasted 7 months or something like that, and caused about 900,000 casualties over a tiny battlefield. And at the end, the Germans were right where they started, except that 900,000 men had been killed or wounded. And one historian has estimated that at the Battle of Verdun, if you actually brought back everybody who died at the Battle of Verdun, they could not all stand on the battlefield. That more than one person per square foot of the battlefield died for each square foot of the battlefield. So 1915, 1916 saw endless variations on this. Right? The French and the British, for the most part, the Germans were attacking at Verdun, but the French and the British were attacking elsewhere, and they kept trying to do mass assaults, and it led to mass casualties, and it didn't change anything. And so by the end of 1916, early 1917, the French and the British and the Germans were all exhausted. They had been fighting for 3 years. They had been setting up these meat grinders. They had been just running people into the machine guns for years, and then they add in poison gas after 1915, and it's an absolute meat grinder, and it hasn't changed anything. The front lines are right where they were at the end of 1914, at the beginning of 1917. Any questions about that? So by 1917, it's really beginning to look like exhaustion. In fact, there was one point at which the French army in 1917 ordered an assault. The French did launch an assault at Verdun, and the soldiers refused. They went on strike and said, we will not do it. We will defend this position, but we are not going to attack because that's suicide. And it was a massive uprising of soldiers who refused to fight or refused to attack for several months. And then the French finally negotiated with the leaders, and then they arrested several of them and shot them for treason or disobeying orders. But the French realized that by 1917 they can't attack anymore. The French soldiers are simply exhausted. The French soldiers are simply unwilling to go over the top again, and that they have no way to win the war, basically. Any questions about that? Things changed in 1917, 1918. And there are two big things that change. The first is that in February of 1917, although the Russians were on a different calendar, so it's actually March of 1917. But the Russians call it the February Revolution. So in February of 1917, the massive bread riots in Petersburg, Petrograd, break out, and the Russian government sends in soldiers to shoot the rioters, and the soldiers do so for a couple days and then get so sickened by it that they mutiny and join the rioters. And once the government realizes that it does not have a military force that can put down the rioting in Petrograd, and that the army itself is mutinying, the Tsar, the Russian monarch, abdicates in early March of 1917, and he abdicates in favor of his son, who is a minor under the regency of the Tsar's brother. The Tsar's brother then abdicates for the son and then abdicates for himself because he's next in line for the throne. And then there's nobody left who's in line for the throne. And so there is no more monarchy, February of 1917. Russia then has a period up until October, February to October, well, March to October, where they have what's called in Russian dvolasti, which means dual power. There's a group of people in the Russian parliament declare a provisional government, and they say they're going to write a constitution. But then another group of radical political parties declare the Petrograd Soviet and claim they're the government of Russia. And there's two groups claiming to be the government of Russia, and they're both in existence for the next 7 months. This ends when the Communist Party, the Bolsheviks in Russia, stage a coup and take over the government. And they then claim they take over the capital, and then in a week of fighting they take over Moscow, and then they claim that they are the government of Russia because they control the two biggest cities in Russia. But they don't control most of the country. They basically control Petrograd and Moscow. This sets off a 3-year civil war over who's going to be the government of Russia. And basically, to make a long story very short, the Bolsheviks win it. But for our purposes, that wouldn't happen until 1921. For our purposes, in 1918, the Bolsheviks decide to negotiate an end to the war with Germany. So the Bolsheviks would negotiate the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which is signed in March of 1918. And it ends the war between Russia and Germany.
Thank you, spell that.
Pardon?
Thank you, spell that.
Sure. There's a couple things that are interesting about the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. One is it handed over a chunk of Russian territory to Germany, which was twice the size of Germany. So it tripled Germany in size overnight. And for our purposes, that means that basically all of what we would call Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine winds up in German hands. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is the thing that really catalyzes the people who hate the Bolsheviks in Russia. They're like, you gave away the whole country, you're traitors, etc. And that's what kicks off the civil war in earnest in Russia, and it would last from 1918 to 1921. But the other thing that's kind of interesting from a historical perspective is that we now know that Vladimir Lenin, who was the leader of the Bolsheviks, was a German spy. He had been in Vienna when the war broke out, and he was stuck in Vienna. He had been a Russian revolutionary communist for years before that, and the Russians had exiled him. And he was hanging out in Vienna with nothing to do, and the World War I breaks out, and he's stuck in Vienna. He can't get back because he's obviously, on the wrong side of the lines, etc. But the Germans go to every Russian revolutionary in Vienna and Zurich, Switzerland, and they say to them, if you pledge to end the war, if you take power in Russia, we'll send you back to Russia. You can carry out a revolution if you want to. And so the Germans actually put him on a SEAL train. They drove the train up to the Baltic, took him on a ferry across to Sweden, and then took them down through Sweden, through Finland, which was Russian territory at that point. It wasn't an independent country, to the Finland station in Petrograd. So they basically dropped a whole bunch of Russian revolutionaries in Petrograd in the middle of the war, hoping that this was in April of 1917, hoping it would cause a revolution, and in fact, it did. But the really key thing here is that they also gave Lenin, in today's terms, over $1 billion to do propaganda. And the Bolsheviks were a tiny party in Russia, but they were the best funded because they had $1 billion from Germany to spend on propaganda and printing presses, etc. And so, in a very real sense, the Germans planted a German agent in Russia, told him to carry out a revolution. He did, and then started the Soviet Union.
How do they still have all that money kicking around after that much of a war?
The Germans? I don't know. That's a good question. They didn't give it to him as a lump sum. They were giving it to him as a monthly thing. One historian went through and added it all up. But,
That must have been fun.
well, I can just imagine him going, "Holy shit. This is turning out to be a really big number."